President-elect Donald Trump denying reports of a transition team in turmoil after some high-profile departures. Welcome to Happening Now, everybody. I'm Jenna Lee.
And good morning, Jenna. And hello, everyone. I'm Eric Shawn in for John Scott this morning. Well, the shakeup comes as the Vice President-elect Pence signs that formal transition papers that allows this process to move forward. This while the President-elect, well, there he goes off to the 21 Club restaurant last night. Just a few blocks from Trump Tower, he ditched the press, and that has caused a kerfluffle today because usually the president or president-elect has to have the tight press pull go along with him, but that didn't happen last night.
There's a learning curve for every position. Doug McKelway's live outside Trump Tower in New York City with more. Doug?
Yes, it did indeed cause a kerfuffle, or the press went into a brief tizzy last night as this happened, because it occurred after the lid had been called, meaning that the word came from the transition office that everybody can go home. News coverage, any kind of reports from the transition team were done for the day. So a few lingering reporters who are still here happened to see a very large motorcade forming here, which included an ambulance, which is usually an indication a very important person is on board. Nobody had any idea where that motorcade was going. It was not until a Bloomberg reporter who happened to be having dinner at the 21 Club saw the Trump entourage come in that we knew what was happening there. Apparently there was a standing ovation given to Donald Trump and his entourage by the diners there in this very, very heavily Democratic city. And he told the diners there, we're going to get your taxes down. Anyway, there have been some sightings here at Trump Tower today, some notable sightings inside Trump Tower. Donald Trump Jr. was seen walking to the elevator. He told reporters nothing. Eric Trump also appeared in the lobby. He told a pool reporter and gave two thumbs up when he was asked whether they could expect any announcements today. He said it's going to be a good day and that more announcements were likely. He would not say whether those amounted to cabinet-level positions. Also appearing today in the lobby, Steve Mnuchin, who it is believed is a candidate for Treasury Secretary. He was much more talkative, saying that he has been talking to Trump about taxes and President-elect Trump's economic plan in general.
I think the other thing, very big focus is regulatory changes, looking at the creation of an infrastructure bank to fund infrastructure investments. So there's a lot of things to do, and I'd say, the economic priorities are clearly taxes, regulatory, trade, and infrastructure.
And he also said that they hope to have this economic plan executed within the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Interesting bio from Stephen Mnuchin. He was born to a Jewish family. He amassed a fortune at Goldman Sachs, estimated to be $40 million. He's also been a Hollywood producer, much like Steve Bannon has been. Notable films to his credit, the film American Sniper and also Mad Max. Also seen today here, Senator Jeff Sessions walking through the lobby with one of those stroller briefcases and an entourage behind him. We've said repeatedly since Trump won this election that he's going to have his pick of jobs here. He was the first Washington establishment insider, the first notable senator to support Donald Trump. Speculation is that he'll get the Secretary of Defense job or perhaps the Secretary of State job. And one more thing, Trump has eluded the press yet again. He is not in Trump Tower this morning. Nobody knows when he left. He's in Washington today. He's going to be meeting with his transition office there and also paying a visit to Vice President Joe Biden at the vice presidential mansion there. Back to you, Jenna.
We need one of those GPS bracelets on him just to follow him wherever he's going to go. I don't know how he'll go for that.
A tracking device.
That's right. Doug, thank you very much. Let's bring in Glenn Hall. He's U.S. news editor for the Wall Street Journal. Glenn, let's take this transition team out of conjecture, opinion about what's going on behind closed doors. You're actually doing something novel. You're reflecting on how Trump has run his businesses in the past to be a way to look at what he might be doing right now. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think there's lessons to be learned from the Trump organization itself. He has always surrounded himself with people he trusted, a small inner circle. In many cases, that's his children at the business. And so you see that also starting to take shape in his administration as he puts together his transition team and looks to build his cabinet, right? So we're seeing growing influence of Jared Kushner, for example, who's his son-in-law. We see, as we were just doing on the show, you see Don Jr. and Eric and Ivanka also having their father's ear on many of these key decisions.
So we'll be watching to see who gets an official title. In the meantime, there's been a lot said, not just of the cabinet positions, but of the 4,000 positions that need to be filled for a new president. And we were taking a look. We were wondering, Glenn, how many people are part of the Trump organization? And because it's a private company, you don't have all of this published. We don't know finances. We don't know all the details. But the number that is quoted most often is about 22,000 people are part of the Trump organization. So what do you think, Glenn, is the crossover between experience from the private sector and how it could apply here in the public sector?
Well, I think there's a lot of difference in this. The U.S. government is a much bigger organization with a huge payroll that Donald Trump has to manage. You were mentioning, there's 1,200 executive level appointments he needs to make in rapid order just to get Senate approvals on those, plus the 15 cabinets. So this is a much larger scale of operation. But I do think in the end you'll be seeing that Donald Trump will be drawing on his experience as a business leader and drawing on his close circle. So when we've been talking about who's in and who's out in the power, there seems to be a kind of balance between folks like Reince Priebus, who got the role as chief of staff, and someone like Steve Bannon, who's got the chief strategist role. So people that are ideological fits or people who are very useful in terms of being able to bridge the gap to a government that he has been an outsider to.
Glenn, take our viewers a little bit behind the scenes as well, because a lot of the reports we're getting are unnamed sources talking about the transition team. This is something that we have to handle as a news organization. I know you do as well as the Wall Street Journal. What are we really basing these reports about what's happening in the transition team on?
Yeah, this is a very normal part of this process where, the transition team is going to want to float names and they want the media coverage to sort of help with the vetting process in a lot of ways to air out any possible problems with candidates. And so, we're all of us working very hard to be as close to the source as possible in terms of people who are advising the president-elect, people who are on the transition team. All of us are working those direct kinds of sources in order to learn as much as we can. And they're, of course, working with us because they need to float those trial balloons. But as Donald Trump himself tweeted, the only person who really knows who the finalists are Donald Trump.
And he's in Washington right now taking meetings as we're now learning. Glenn, great to have you on the program. Thank you so much.
Well, Jenna, there's some troubling new clues for the search for a missing man who reportedly was found at an apartment where Jory Kamel was last seen, and why police suspect that there was foul play. Plus, there are a slew of reports of the chaos supposedly in the president-elect's transition team. Mr. Trump tweeted that's not the case. But is the process working as smoothly as it should be? Someone who's been through a presidential transition will tell us. Karl Rove on that, coming up next.
Take your time. Don't let the stories like the New York Times and all the people who want instant appointments press you into making decisions too soon. Expand the number of folks you're looking at. Yeah, you want to trim down the internal people that are there. You want to get rid of some of the lobbyists or all of the lobbyists. That's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But don't rush into this, and don't let the media rush you into making decisions.
That's former New Hampshire Governor John Sununu, who's also the former White House Chief of Staff to the first President Bush. We're giving some advice to President-elect Donald Trump and a word of caution to the transition team that reportedly is in chaos and disarray. So what should be happening? Well, Karl Rove, former senior advisor, Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, joins us now. He's a Fox News contributor and has been through presidential transitions before. Karl, good to see you. What strikes me about this is we've had no briefings, no news conference. You really don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We've got the tweets.
Yeah. Well, at some point he does need to give a news conference, and they need to prepare for that moment. But I thought very wise advice from Governor Sununu. Don't be rushed by somebody else's schedule. Do have a schedule, and do have some good news. And don't be afraid to start delivering news once you're able to keep delivering news. But don't be rushed.
How long should this take? When do you think we should, in that way, have the first name?
Well, look, this week and next week is going to be Thanksgiving. I'd aim to start laying out names after Thanksgiving week, and sometimes they are in a place where they can make some names before Thanksgiving, but it was a late year. November 8th, one of the last days on which you can hold an election, and so he's got a little bit of time. But,
so
I'd wait until after Thanksgiving and just simply say we want to let people have a good Thanksgiving, and then we're going to start making announcements.
So basically, take a deep breath, let them go through the process, is what you're saying.
Yeah, don't be rushed, because look, if you name somebody that you later have to withdraw because the vetting was too quick and you didn't consider some element of their background or some item in their background that would cause controversy, that's a bigger problem than taking an extra week or so before you begin naming.
Mr. Trump tweeted this, very organized process taking place. As I decide on cabinet and many other positions, I am the only one who knows who the finalists are. But then, Carl, you got all this palace intrigue. Jared Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law, ironically, his father had been basically prosecuted by Chris Christie, put in jail for tax evasion, served 2 years back in 2005. And there are other reports that Jared now has had a purge and a push, so to speak, although others say no, that Mike Pence wanted to get rid of lobbyists in terms of the staff.
Well, look, first of all, I thought that putting Pence in charge of the transition after the election was a very smart move. George W. Bush did that in 2000. We had an excellent director of the preliminary planning, Clay Johnson, longtime friend of the governor of Texas, who later became the director of White House personnel. But it was a step up and supported by Clay Johnson that the vice president stepped in and do it. Smart move on the part of President-elect Trump. I'm not certain, however, I would have then purged everybody. You can layer people on top of them and that way avoid a negative story. And if they weren't going to have lobbyists, they should have had that rule in place from the beginning. It looks a little odd doing it now. But Mike Pence has really good judgment, will pay a lot of attention to the people on the Hill who are going to ultimately have to confirm these nominees, and I think do a very good job of presenting options to the president-elect.
Now, while they're going through this process, last night, controversy because the president-elect did not go with the tight pull press from the White House, went down to 21 Club for dinner. What do you expect? I mean, look, he's a New Yorker. He's used to walking in the streets. He's going to find out when he hits the White House. You can't leave the house.
No, you can't leave the house. And look, it's a pain for every president to have the press following him around, but that's part of it. Mm-hmm. They have to serve a function on behalf of the American people, and the president doesn't have a right to untrampled privacy. And there are going to be some other things that he's going to find unattractive. The rumor is that he wants to come home every weekend in New York. Well, first of all, Fifth Avenue and 57th would have to be armored up in the middle of downtown like you cannot imagine. And the expense, I mean, taxpayers would quickly get unhappy with the cost of moving Air Force One plus all the support personnel that have to surround the president at any given moment from Washington, D.C. to New York every weekend. So that idea, I hope, is an idea that dies in early
What
death.
type of logistics are you talking about? I mean, it's already a mess. It's chaos right now.
Right. Well,
on
remember,
57th and 5th Avenue.
Remember, they'll have to armor up that building. That building is probably, from the perspective of the security personnel, insecure right now. And so if they were going to have the president there each and every weekend, and people knew he was going to be in that building, they'd have to make all kinds of security arrangements in the neighborhood that are going to be really unacceptable to people in New York. It's one thing if he's coming up for a weekend at for the UN. It's another thing if he's going to be there each and every weekend. And
you said he may not even have the Oval Office?
Well, look, my understanding is that for the first year of his time in office, President Trump will not have the Oval Office. President Obama could have told the Secret Service, I know you want to modernize the Oval Office with security enhancements, literally strip it down to the bare walls and build it back up so we got bulletproof glass and so forth and so on, security arrangements in it, in my last year in office. But instead he said, why don't you do that when whoever comes next? So the President of the United States, President Trump, will, my understanding is, spend most of his first year using Richard Nixon's old office in the old executive office building across Executive Drive and up the Navy steps.
Oh man, that's going to be a surprise. Who's going to tell him that?
Yeah, well, I suspect he might already know that.
Carl, good to see you. Thank you for your advice and your insight as always.
Thanks for having me.
Jenna?
With Republicans set to control Congress and the White House come January, what that power shift could mean for this familiar Democratic leader. We're going to talk about that after the break. Some interesting moves there, and we just have some brand new news. Also, a powerful new voice now backing pipeline protesters in North Dakota.
It's going to make a few people billionaires by impoverishing everybody else.
On this program, protests targeting an oil pipeline in North Dakota turning into a two-way fight with police. Hundreds of demonstrators blocking a railroad in the central part of the state, and they reportedly slashed tires on police cars as they arrived, leading to some arrests. Now they're getting support from Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I think they have a lot of courage. I think they're standing up for America. They're standing up for American democracy. They're standing up in the face of a bully.
They could be standing up, but if they're slashing tires, they're also breaking the law. It's important to point that out. Environmentalists in the Standing Rock Sioux tribe say the project threatens drinking water and sacred lands, but the company behind the nearly $4 billion project is denying those claims.
Why delay? I mean, if there wasn't consternation about
we just got a shellacking last Tuesday. We got an unexpected defeat, and we've got to recalibrate and decide how we go forward.
Oh, that's our Capitol Hill producer, Chad Pergram, capturing a pretty stunning moment of candor from a top House Democrat. This is Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, where she could face a leadership challenge. So what will the Democrats do next? Joining us is Simon Rosenberg, president and founder of NDN, the New Democratic Network, and a former Bill Clinton campaign advisor, and David Avila, chairman of GOPAC. So Simon and David, welcome. Simon, let me start with you. Is Mrs. Pelosi in danger of being dumped?
I don't think so, but I think what the Democrats are going to do is have a healthy debate, frankly, about what just happened in this election and how we can do better in future elections. I think there was a sense that this was too quick, and there needed to be more of a discussion about the direction of the Democratic caucus. One thing I hope that happens, and that's being discussed, is there's talk of creating a spot in the leadership for a younger, more recently elected member. Democrats have to get purposeful now about accelerating the careers of the younger members, give them more power and authority. I think that's one of the things that will shake out in the next couple of weeks.
Well, one younger member that potentially you mentioned is Tim Ryan. Yeah. He's from Ohio, son of a steel worker. He's being mentioned as someone who could potentially challenge Mrs. Pelosi. David, do you think that is the recipe that the Democrats need to move forward?
The Democrats are whistling past the graveyard if they don't accept the fact that last week's election results were a complete repudiation of the progressive agenda that Democrats have been forcing down Americans' throats for the last 7 years. Look, the reality is the Democratic Party is no longer a national party. They are a party that has some success in a limited number of states: New York, California, and Massachusetts. A third of House Democrats come from those 3 states. And for the Democratic Party to be relevant again, they're going to have to come up with a message that gets beyond just the progressive base that is dominating their party right now.
Yeah, Simon, what about that? Can the Democratic Party reshape itself? I mean, we saw that basically during Bill Clinton's campaign back in 1992. That's the challenge.
I mean, if the Republicans really believe what he just said, they're going to have a very hard 2 years. Look, we won more votes at the national level. We picked up seats in the House and the Senate. The Republican Party has only won more votes in a national election one time in the last 28 years, right? There's no question that we've had a hard time replicating the success at the national level that we've had, down ballot. But, I'm not worried about the Democratic Party, right? We are close in the House. We're close in the Senate. We won more votes at the presidential level. I think there are changes we have to make. We didn't do a good enough job, I think, making the core economic argument in this election. But the notion that we're a defeated party, I mean, look at the favorability of the two parties. The Republican Party has a net negative favorability of 30 points right now. We're seen as being very favorable by the American people. The two parties are much more even than we just heard from my colleague here. This is going to be an interesting 2 years because the chance for overreach of the Republicans, if they think the public's behind the agenda that Trump's going to propose, it's going to be a hard 2 years for these guys.
But then, Simon, why was there such a blatant rejection by so many millions of Americans of the Democratic Party?
But we won more votes in the election than the Republicans did, right? There were people who voted against us, but more people voted against the Republicans.
In 3 states, the advantage you have is because in California, New York, and Massachusetts, you have such a dominating, and congratulations for dominating those 3 states.
Just keep saying these things. It doesn't make them true.
Look, Simon, here's the best thing Simon can do to help unify his party. To every congressional candidate who won and lost, he should send a participation trophy to, and he can send one to Hillary Clinton too. If they continue to believe the ideas that they have forced on the American people for the last 7 years are the direction they think this country want to go, that's why now we have the White House, we have the Senate in a year when everyone on television said Republicans were going to lose the Senate. We held the Senate, we kept the U.S. House, we have 34 of 50 governors, we have 68 of 99 state legislative chambers, and to not accept that as a defeat, go ahead and let Democrats do that, and they will continue to be a party that is relevant in about 10 states of the 50.
Simon, what about those stats? I mean, tonight, Mrs. Clinton will come out publicly at 8 p.m. tonight in Washington. She's being honored by the Children's Defense Fund. What do you want her to say? What should she say?
I don't look. She's no longer going to be a major part of the future of the Democratic Party. She had her chance. It didn't happen. I think the campaign was well run in many ways, but they also made many mistakes at the end. And I think that now, for the Democrats, it's time for a new generation of Democrats to rise. That's what's critical for us, right? The under 45 vote in this country went overwhelmingly Democratic. The future of the country is trending Democratic. We have to accelerate our party's turn. Just the way, look, I want to credit the House Republicans, right? The turn from Boehner to Ryan was a generational turn, right? We're going to need to go through our own generational turn in the Democratic Party in the next few years. We've got great leaders coming up. I feel good about the future of the Democratic Party, but I agree that I'm under no illusion. We have a lot of work to do, but I don't think we're in as dire straits as many say.
All right, Simon and David, we have to leave it there because we have some breaking news, so I'm going to give it to Jenna.
Yep.
This is interesting, Eric. We're seeing Newt Gingrich outside the transition office for Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. Let's listen in.
It's a huge deal. And second, my presumption was that knowing Trump, who's a very strong CEO, I mean, Trump knows what he wants to do. He makes decisions very fast. And knowing that he's going to want to think through his government, my working assumption was that the real transition would begin about 10 o'clock Wednesday morning, and that it was impossible to accelerate it. I mean, people could do studies, they could do papers, they could say, here are the 4,000 jobs you need to fill, but nobody was going to make any real decisions until Donald J. Trump turned as president-elect and began to do it. Now, I just had a great talk with Mike, who's an old friend, and who's going to be a great vice president. And I'm confident that, in fact, they're beginning to put things in place in a very orderly way. But it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, you can't. You'd be really dumb to accelerate and start making mistakes in order to make the press happy. I mean, they got it. You know, they got 4 years. They don't have.
What type of collaboration is there between VP-elect Pence and Donald Trump at this point? And do you see?
I think hourly.
For Attorney General?
I can't say anything about who's under consideration, but I can tell you that I think that the relationship between the president-elect and the vice president-elect is very close. That's why, you know, he was assigned to come down here and be the head of the transition. I think if they didn't have a close relationship, just as the Bush-Cheney relationship was very, very close, if they didn't have a close relationship, you wouldn't have President-elect Pence down here doing this. And I think he's been given a very substantial grant of authority to help make things work. But again, nobody should kid themselves. I mean, this will be President Trump's administration. He will make all the major decisions. That's how he's run his empire when in the private sector, and he's not. And it works for him. I mean, he did, after all, you know, beat 15 other Republicans before beating Hillary. So he probably has some confidence in himself.
So what about you, though? Are you expecting some type of cabinet position?
No.
What do you want?
No, I want to be the chief planner.
Chief planner. Thank you very much.
Chief planner.
That's it.
That's what he wants. I mean, you might as well say what you want in order to get it. That was Newt Gingrich outside, again, the Trump transition office in Washington, D.C. As Doug McKelway reported to us earlier, no one knew that Donald Trump was heading to Washington, D.C. until he actually arrived there. He's there at work. Vice President Mike Pence is in the office, as well as his wife. The reason why we have cameras there is not only because Donald Trump is there, but we are actually awaiting Mike Pence, the vice president-elect, to go visit with Vice President Joe Biden at his residence. So that's also happening today. But some interesting words from Newt Gingrich, calling Donald Trump a very strong CEO. He makes his decisions very fast, and saying that it's impossible to accelerate this process, that will take 2 to 3 weeks, saying it would be dumb to accelerate. This really echoes some of our guests earlier in the program that said, listen, you have to vet everyone that you would like to assume a certain role. Because if you get halfway through the security clearance process and there's a red flag, then you have to withdraw that name. That was what Karl Rove was explaining to us, and that can cause some further volatility as the president-elect gets ready to assume his office. So interesting to hear from Newt Gingrich, who describes the Mike Pence-Donald Trump relationship as a Bush-Cheney relationship. We'll be watching for more news from the transition office. In the meantime, President-elect Trump and Senator John McCain are bumping heads over Russia. Is it a good idea for the U.S. to mend fences with Moscow? Is that even possible? Our next guest says it won't work, has some strong ideas, as he was a double agent working for the FBI. Plus, federal officials are sending in more help to shore up our borders, where they're seeing a spike in illegal immigrants crossing over into the United States.
Now here's a quick look at still what's coming up on the next hour of Happening Now. Vice President-elect Mike Pence, well, he's overlooking the White House transition process, but what will life be like for him once everything settles down. Plus, there's a collision on a train track in Florida. Crumpling cars and leaking thousands of gallons of fuel. We'll have the latest on the investigation into the cause of that crash. And folks living in a San Francisco skyscraper, well, they're getting a bit of a sinking feeling. What scientists say about the building, it's tilting and sinking into the ground.
Well, President-elect Donald Trump expressing high hopes for better relations with Russia, but one leading Republican lawmaker is skeptical. Mr. Trump speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin by phone for the first time this week, both sides stressing a desire to improve relations between the U.S. and Moscow. Senator John McCain, though, issuing this warning about that prospect, saying, quote, "We should place as much faith in such statements as any other made by a former KGB agent who has plunged his country into tyranny, murdered his political opponents, invaded his neighbors, threatened America's allies, and attempted to undermine America's elections." Quite a list there. Joining me now, Naveed Jamali, Reserve Officer with the Office of Naval Intelligence, a Senior Fellow in the Program on National Security at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and as he has shared with us, a former double agent for the FBI who came face to face with some Russians with an interesting backstory. Naveed, based on your experience, what do you think of what Senator John McCain had to say?
You know, it's harsh, but I have to say it's kind of true. When we talk about foreign policy, look, I'm actually excited to sort of see what President-elect Trump can do in foreign policy. That being said, Russia still has a vote, and I don't see that what Putin is saying syncs up to his actions. You know, if we're talking about a Russian reset, that also kind of means the Russians have to reset as well. I don't really see them changing much.
Naveed, if you stand by just for a moment, we have some other news we just need to run to just temporarily because it is news.
Sure.
Our viewers just saw former Speaker Newt Gingrich speaking live about the Trump transition, and he's on the phone with us now. Speaker Gingrich, tell us a little bit more about this morning. What happened?
Well, I had a very, very good meeting with Vice President-elect Mike Pence, and we covered a lot of ground. I feel very comfortable having worked similarly with Vice President Cheney back in 2000 when he ran the transition for President George W. Bush. I think that they are getting their ducks in a row in a very rapid way. I think that President-elect Trump's ability as a CEO to make decisions and to work through a series of things will become more and more obvious. And I think over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll see that this is going to be a very effective transition, bringing together a lot of very talented people, and doing so at the very specific direction of the president-elect. He's a very hands-on leader, and he is deeply immersed in this. And Vice President-elect Pence and I are old friends, go back many, many years, and we were able to compare notes, and I'm very comfortable with the way they're moving forward.
When you say compare notes, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, we talked about the lessons I'd learned in the Bush-Cheney transition. We talked about specific people and things, none of which I can talk about on the air, but how to think about the first 100 days, how to think about the opening day and the potential of eliminating a lot of Obama's executive orders in a very decisive way. And also how to relate to the House and Senate, where my background is Speaker of the House. You know, I'm very sensitive to the importance of integrating the Republican leadership and the Republican majority in the House and Senate. So it was a very comfortable thing. And frankly, as the governor, Mike Pence found himself the day after the election when he won the governorship suddenly having 60 days in order to organize the government of Indiana. And that's a pretty good background for him. It gives him a pretty good memory base to then think about organizing the federal government. And in that sense, I think he had great experience in Indiana doing exactly what he's now helping President-elect Trump do.
You mentioned to a reporter that you would like the job of chief planner.
Yeah.
We were wondering if that's an event planner position. No, we actually would like a little bit more description from you, Speaker.
All I can tell you is I think one of the great problems in Washington is that people drown so much in the daily news, and they drown so much in this week's scandal or this week's gossip or whatever this week's problem is. There's very little systematic effort to think ahead. And if we're going to get back to being the kind of country we want to be in, we're going to truly make America great again, it takes thinking out over 4, 5, 6 years. And luckily, my own background, both as Speaker of the House and as somebody who helped plan the 1994 contract, and somebody who worked with Ronald Reagan in the 80s, I think that I can bring some unique ability to do that. It's not an official job. It doesn't get me cabinet rank or any of those fancy things, but it would allow me to try to bring to bear what I've learned over a long period of time about how government in America works.
Speaker Gingrich, if you could just set the record straight, our viewers are hearing a lot of different words to describe the Trump transition. We even used it on our program, and I want to be really sensitive with the words that we choose because they matter, especially in a time like this. The description was the Trump transition team is in turmoil, or turmoil is happening. What words would you use to describe what's happening behind closed doors?
I would say the Trump transition team is in transition. That was inevitable because President-elect Donald J. Trump is, in fact, a hands-on CEO. He's a guy who knows how to run things, and he is, I think, committed to putting together an administration that bears his imprint and achieves what he set out to do. And I would say that, in that sense, it probably confuses the traditional political press because they keep trying to apply traditional standards, and you can't do that with Trump. They tried that all through the primaries, and he kept winning despite the fact that nobody understood it. They have tried to apply it to him now, and the same confusion exists. This is a very competent manager who runs a very big worldwide system, who has a real knack for getting things organized, but he's going to do it his way on his terms. And if that doesn't fit the New York Times, then that's the New York Times problem. It's not Trump's problem.
Just a quick thought from you, and we appreciate your accessibility, Speaker Gingrich, because there has been that's been one of the big stories over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, it's all baloney. It's the same people who thought Trump would disappear and the same people who thought Clinton would win. So they've now found a new way to be confused.
So what do you think is happening within the Trump team as far as press access?
I think they're having very serious, methodical meetings, organizing a whole range of decisions. They ultimately have to find 4,000 people, starting with cabinet offices, and I think they're doing it in a very methodical way. And in the end, that means lots of different people are going to offer options to President-elect Trump, but he's going to make the decisions. I mean, nobody should be confused about this. He is the President-elect. He understands that. And just as he was the CEO of Trump World, he's now going to be, in effect, the CEO of the U.S. government. We're not used to that. We're not used to somebody with his management skills and his level of drive and energy. So it's going to be a very interesting administration, I think, and I think all of us will have more than enough to talk about. But I've got to run, but I'm delighted to.
But are you sure? Are you 100% sure you don't want an official role? 100%?
I'm 100%.
Okay. Speaker Gingrich, thank you. Appreciate it very much. On the fly. Speaker Newt Gingrich speaking to us about the Trump transition and what's happening in Washington, D.C. This is real time. You're going to hear a lot of descriptions. That's why we want to hear from somebody from the inside who definitely has a point of view, but consider all points of view as you're hearing the stories about what's happening behind closed doors. We're going to continue our conversation about Russia. That's one of the big items for President-elect Donald Trump. Naveed Jamali is going to be back with us after the break, but we'll take a quick break and be right back with more happening now. The record, but we saw what happens on the show, our own show, when we're trying to figure out what's happening behind closed doors. There were reports earlier this morning that Donald Trump had left Trump Towers and that he was in Washington, D.C. Indeed, that's actually not the case. And Kellyanne Conway is setting this record straight, saying, this is incorrect. How did these nonsense rumors get started? He is here. He's a couple blocks away from us in Trump Towers. Again, we go back to sort of the learning curve on all of this for everybody, because you do have a new person assuming the role as president-elect. There are questions about press access, what's been done before and what will be done moving forward. And, everyone wants information. So we're going to try to keep it as accurate as possible. That's all we want to do. And now we have where President-elect Donald Trump is, which is in Trump Towers.
And that is a good example of why I need that protective press pool from the White House to accompany the president-elect at all times.
That is because when there is a representative from the press, you know exactly where President-elect Trump is at every moment. I mean, that is part of the reason why we have that set up. So we'll see what happens from here on. We're only about 10 minutes to noon Eastern, so there's still a lot more to go in the day. In the meantime, back with us, Naveed Jamali, Reserve Officer with the Office of Naval Intelligence and Senior Fellow in the Program on National Security at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. We're talking a little bit about Russia, Naveed, and understand about what needs to happen between our two countries. At the top of the list, because you've been in the front lines of sorts with this relationship, what advice would you give President-elect Trump?
Well, Jen, I mean, just as we're seeing, we're all trying to figure out what the new Trump administration is going to look like. And I think the process, as Americans, we're all used to this. The Russians, not so much. They don't have a peaceful transition of power. So I think they're looking at this, and a lot of countries are too, and thinking, how can we take advantage of this? So it's a very important thing, and as President Obama is doing, to express unity and to show strength in our transition, and to show that, in fact, President Trump will be the president. I think that to us it seems like a foregone conclusion, but perhaps to our foreign frenemies, as it were, that may not be the case. Now, in the case of Russia, I'm going to be bold. Look, Russia, Putin has come out and said some nice words, but it's all about actions. And I think perhaps one of the gestures that Mr. Putin could do that would perhaps go a long way in terms of setting our relations in a different velocity would be to return Edward Snowden. I don't think that whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you can agree that he broke the law. And he's essentially a fugitive in Russia, although not charged. And that would go a long way to sort of atoning and perhaps restructuring a relationship, is to return him to the United States.
Well, that'd be interesting. We'll watch for that. David Ignatius in the Washington Post wrote about the importance of deterrence. And I'm wondering, in just about a minute or so, Naveed, if you could tell us what would Russia understand when it comes to deterrence, a show of strength to not push the line with the new president-elect in the United States of America?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm hopeful, and I've been very critical of the Obama administration. Look, Syria it has not gone our way, and it's not just gone our way in the humanitarian disaster that's evolved. We've created a foothold for Russia in the Middle East as a result of this. They're not going anywhere. And frankly, the only thing the Russians understand is if you're going to negotiate this, and I think President-elect Trump understands this as a businessman, you want to negotiate from a position of strength. And the way that you do so is with a strong military and with a military that you're not going to use, but you're clear that it's there and its capabilities. And I think that, the Russians, they don't understand peaceful transition, but they do understand strength. And look, they have their national interest and Putin's national interest are to expand. That's not going to change. We've nothing has changed in Ukraine. He's still bombing Aleppo and in Syria. There is no change. So until they think that we are serious, until they realize that we are in fact a strong country, I don't think you're going to see the tenor of what Putin comes out of his mouth might change, but his actions certainly aren't.
Naveed, great to have you on the program. Thanks for rolling with us with that breaking news. Appreciate it.
You got it.
Well, Jenna, it's not the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but the Tilting Tower of San Francisco. Coming up, we'll have more on the court battle over a sinking building. Property values may be on the rise in San Francisco, but one of the city's most exclusive properties is literally going down. Engineers say the Millennium Tower, it's a 58-story skyscraper, is sinking. And now the blame game is underway. Who's at fault? Claudia Cowan is live from the city by the bay with that sinking building behind her. Hi, Claudia.
Hi, Eric. That's right. 7 years after it opened, the luxury high-rise is now the focus of a legal blitz and a PR disaster, with some 400 residents wondering how long it will be safe to stay. A shiny symbol of the dot-com building boom, San Francisco's 58-story Millennium Tower is tilting toward infamy.
It's a pretty view, but it's a sinking view.
Jerry Dotson, who paid more than $2 million for his retirement pad, showed us the tilt. This golf ball doesn't stop rolling. The city is now suing the developer for failing to tell buyers the building was moving. It's sunk at least 16 inches and is tilting 2 inches at its base, well in excess of projections. The lawsuit claims the developer knew the building was sinking in 2008, more than a year before the condos went on sale.
Buyer beware doesn't cut it here. Someone selling real estate must disclose details about known property conditions. The law is very clear on that.
While maintaining the building is 100% safe, Millennium Partners says the settling was within predicted ranges until the ground was weakened by a government dig across the street. In a statement, a Millennium spokesman calls the Transbay Transit Center project reckless and the city's lawsuit a ploy to deflect blame. Amid all the finger-pointing in this earthquake-prone city, Jerry Dotson lives in fear of losing his investment, or worse.
You wonder sometimes whether you'll wake up, in the morning. Because if the earthquake occurs and the building does collapse, you may not know it.
Dodson is also suing the government and the developers for fraud, and along with his fellow neighbors there in the Millennium Tower, wonders when or even if the building can be fixed. Eric?
Ow. All right, Claudia. Thank you so much.
What a story.
Yep.
Well, new next hour happening now. Iraqi troops pushing deeper into Mosul, but ISIS is putting up a fight. We're going to have the latest from the front lines there. And this ancient inscription of the Ten Commandments could be yours, but there's a catch. All that and more coming up at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.